Today, we are going to have a great time with my fabulous skeptics who will introduce them to these. We got some brilliant people from the Star Garrison, which is Jason Maston and Steve Gideon, who are going to obviously either praise or detest everything from the prequels. We will find out. I'm sure they'll be purely brilliant, and we can take it from there. The brilliant JC, who's sitting in the corner, I don't know if you can see him, is an advocate of everything prequel-wise, a fantastic man, apparently going to be on Kevin Smith's show. So if you want to tune into that later, it's not on this channel, but you will be able to find it another one. And a brilliantly lovely Bryan Young, filmmaker and extraordinaire, and also an advocate of the brilliant prequels and everything goes with it. So we're celebrating 50 years, of course, of Lucasfilm, and also supporting FIRST, which is the robotics non-for-profit enterprise that helps very young children to teens, all about science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. God damn it, I'm amazed I got that right. If anybody would like to help us out, it really is a fantastic cause. And Lucasfilm and Disney really, really appreciate the support that you've been watching with us as well. So click on that link if you want to help us out. A couple of dollars would make a massive difference. That's me talking. I'm going to finish. And I'm going to bang you right over to Mr. Bryan Young. He's going to tell us about Jar Jar and the appreciation.
I was told when I got in here that everybody wanted to hear the Jar Jar is the key to everything sort of situation. I think without Jar Jar Binks, you don't get the Ewoks defeating the Empire in Return of the Jedi. And a lot of people go like, what are you talking about? But I think it's not actually that long of a walk. And I can explain it, and then I'd love to hear what everybody else thinks about it. And I know, JC, you've got your own opinions about Jar Jar and your own rant. But really, I think when you look at Jar Jar, he is the most loyal creature, but no one in Star Wars, but no one really wants to give him that benefit of the doubt. And it's not until he shows up in Phantom Menace when Qui-Gon really sees that inherent worth in him, even though he's of absolutely no value, right? Like Jar Jar's around and everybody's like, let's get rid of this guy. Obi-Wan calls him a pathetic life form. Like no one really wants him around at all. And Qui-Gon's like, no, we're going to bring him along. And seeing that worth in him, that kindness that a Jedi is supposed to show everyone, is really what ends up saving the day. Because without Qui-Gon having that kindness for Jar Jar, without him really just taking him along, he wouldn't have been able to meet and have that understanding with Queen Amidala. So they wouldn't have been able to win the day. They wouldn't have been able to win back Naboo from the Trade Federation. Well, fast forward to between Phantom Menace and Attack of the Clones, and Palpatine, who's like the most brilliant chess master in the galaxy, is thinking to himself, or to Palpatine, he's not Emperor at this point, obviously, but he's thinking to himself, like, where the hell did I lose here? Like, how did this not work out for me? And it goes back to Jar Jar. It goes back to that like kindness to creatures and people and beings that wouldn't ordinarily, have that because they're obnoxious, because they're not someone you'd want to associate with. And he realizes he can exploit this as well. And this is how he manipulates Jar Jar in Attack of the Clones. He's trying to take moves out of the Jedi playbook to get his own ends and use the inherent like loyalty and niceness of wanting to do the right thing out of Jar Jar. So Revenge of the Sith happens, right? And Yoda is left on Dagobah trying to figure out where he went wrong, what happened, right? And it's that kindness that the Jedi lost sight of. He even refers in Attack of the Clones about how the Jedi become more arrogant, especially the ones who are supposed to know better. And who is he left to study with on Dagobah? We know in the Clone Wars, he had Qui-Gon to talk to a lot. And where does Qui-Gon tell him everything went wrong? Everything goes wrong with the Jedi and how they react to everything because they've lost touch with all of this stuff. So where's the next time we see Yoda? He shows up in Empire Strikes Back, and who is he acting just like? He's acting like Yoda, or he's acting like Jar Jar. He is obnoxious. He's this imp, he's horrible. And Luke is left to struggle with him. And Luke fails this test because this is Yoda testing Luke. I like to call the Empire Strikes Back moment where Yoda's an imp the Jar Jar test, right? And Luke fails miserably. Luke is just like, get out of here. And Luke lashes out at him. And that's when Yoda actually becomes real and says, like, I can't teach you. Because this is this idea that Qui-Gon is passed down through the Jedi and through to Yoda. And Luke does everything wrong here, right? Luke doesn't help. Luke lashes out at Yoda because he's acting like Jar Jar, and he leaves just like Anakin does against the order of his masters to take off and help his loved ones in these attachments, and everything is going wrong. And Empire Strikes Back ends, and it ends horribly because Luke can't conceive of being the person, being the Jedi that he needs to be. So fast forward to Return of the Jedi, and you have the same test coming at him with the Ewoks, right? Like Han is ready to blast the Ewoks 9 ways from Sunday, and Luke is the one who stays his hand. Luke is the one who says, no, I've seen this play out before. We need to help these. We need to not resist them. We need to see what they can do. And Luke uses that lesson that he learned from Yoda, who learned that from Qui-Gon, who learned that from Jar Jar, in order to implement that, to get the Ewoks to help them, these creatures who'd escaped the notice of Palpatine and the Empire, to help them win the day. And I think George Lucas was doing this on purpose. You'll look, there's moments in Phantom Menace with Jar Jar that mirror moments in Return of the Jedi here, right? You've got Jar Jar going and trying to steal a piece of meat from the Chuba dealer, and then starting a fight, and a Skywalker has to come in and stop the fight. He comes in screen right, goes for the meat. The Skywalker shows up. Same thing happens with Chewie. Chewie's cast in the Jar Jar role here on Endor, when he goes for the meat, and Luke has to stop that fight that starts between Chewie having gone for the meat and the Ewoks coming to kill them all. It's really purposeful, and Jar Jar is really the key of the fable-like morality that George Lucas was trying to portray in Star Wars from start to finish. And it goes from one end of George Lucas's movies to the other with those lessons that you have to be kind to people, even if you don't think you can get anything from them.
I'll jump in on that. I'll jump in on that and take it one step further. It is those same qualities that ultimately Luke uses to turn Darth Vader from Darth Vader back to Anakin Skywalker, right? So it carries even beyond just the Ewoks. It's like, maybe that's the final test. And then he walks in and he's like, he uses those same things. And to roll back to what you were saying about Qui-Gon at the beginning, Qui-Gon recognizes something in Jar Jar at the very beginning, that Obi-Wan Kenobi, I think there's even a shot of Obi-Wan like rolling his eyes at Qui-Gon. And right then and there, you can carry that through all 6 movies, where Qui-Gon at that moment is the Jedi the way that they were at their best, right? And Obi-Wan is who you follow the story with, and that's where the Jedi fail. And then it picks up, like you said, in Empire with Yoda being like, oh no, Qui-Gon was right. The rest of us were wrong. And that's where Luke diverges. He comes back to Qui-Gon, the living force, and reconnects with that. I love that theory. I haven't heard you talk about that before, so that's awesome.
Yeah, no, I think
in that detail.
Yeah, no, Jar Jar he's the key to really understanding, I think, the moral center of Star Wars.
My thing with Jar Jar is similar, but it's not as based in the mythology of Star Wars, and more on how people reacted to Jar Jar. And I was 18 years old when The Phantom Menace came out. So I was that prime age of like, I loved Star Wars when I was 5. And then I was 18 and too cool for school. And then Jar Jar comes out. And all of my friends are like, this guy sucks. This guy's stupid. Oh my God, he steps in poop. What is going on? Star Wars has gone off the rails. But my theory on Jar Jar is that the reason that people of our age group hate him so much is that as children, we are taught on the playground, in kindergarten, first grade, second grade, the weird kid, the kid who's different, who probably in our case was us, is the kid who get teased. And either you're going to tease the kid who gets teased, or you are going to be teased with him. And I think it's a psychological thing that we are taught from a very young age that if you don't fit in, you're going to be the one getting teased. And Jar Jar didn't fit in immediately in that movie. He doesn't fit in with anybody. He's banished from his home people. The Jedi don't like him. The Naboo don't like him. Nobody likes Jar Jar. And none of us liked Jar Jar, right? But the reason I think we don't like Jar Jar is he is pure of heart. He is the innocence of the Star Wars galaxy. And he doesn't conform. Jar Jar, why were you banished? Oh, I'm clumsy. He's just honest. He just is who he is. He wears his character. He wears his heart on his sleeve. And we are taught from a very young age, if you do that, you're going to get beat up. You're going to get teased. You're going to get wedgied. And so I think when people my age group saw Jar Jar at age 18, it took them back to that time where it's just like, well, if I don't fit in, I'm going to get teased and I'm going to be on the receiving end of all of this. And I can't have that. So Jar Jar sucks, right? Who's cool? Darth Maul is cool. Like, I didn't like Darth Maul at all when he came out. And the reason is I was like, okay, they just put the devil in Star Wars. Like, this isn't that imaginative. But Jar Jar was totally different. Like, there's something so pure about Jar Jar that takes you back to being that geeky little kid that got teased on the playground. And at age 18, I was able to see, like, oh, that kid was me. That kid was you. That kid was you. That kid was my friend group. That like Sam Witwer has a theory about the original trilogy that everybody loves Han Solo because Han Solo is like your older brother who you look up to. And everybody says, I'm Han Solo. But really, everybody is Luke Skywalker. And I think that's Jar Jar in the original, or in the prequel trilogy, is Jar Jar. We were all Jar Jar. We were all the kids who got teased. And now that we're seeing him, and maybe we're kind of cool now, or maybe we have established ourselves a little bit. It's interesting because I think a lot of people turned on him. And, I work with a lot of people at Scum and Villainy who are in their late 20s, and they love Jar Jar. They grew up thinking he was cool. And when they stopped thinking he was cool was when their dad or their older brother or their older sister was like, Jar Jar's not cool. You're going to get teased. I'm going to tease you if you keep liking Jar Jar. Darth Maul is cool. But when they were kids, they loved Jar Jar. And they loved him until somebody who was older than them told them, you are going to be lesser if you don't like Jar Jar. And that's why I think people don't like him. I think it's a weird psychological thing from the time that we were kids.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I think you're quite right. I mean, it's sort of like a peer pressure thing, like you said. And not the same thing, but I mean, I always think if you look at Lord of the Rings, which obviously came out a lot earlier, Samwise Gamgee is regarded as the bumbling fool who walks around, and they see him in the first episode and they think all that guy is going to do is tread on people's feet. He's going to lose things. And by the end of the movie, you think, actually, if he wasn't there, the whole of Middle Earth would have been destroyed, because this big fat bumbling idiot is the only one who could carry the ring. The actual hero, who everybody thought was Frodo, he would have given the ring away. He would have kept it. He would have gone to the dark side exactly like Darth Vader with no help whatsoever. And the only person who could have helped him was the fool standing behind him who no one noticed. So it's a very interesting point. Poor Jason and Steve haven't been able to talk yet. So we'd love to know what you think as well. Let's start with Jason as he's smiling a bit more. Tell us your views on what the lovely two people have just talked about.
Well, I'm just a couple of years older than JC. So I was about 20 when episode 1 came out. So I'm of that same generation. I grew up loving the original trilogy, but even back then, I recall like some of my older siblings, like Oh man, the Ewoks, they suck. What do you put teddy bears? How could they overthrow the Empire, right? So trying to remember which Kevin Smith it was. Like all Return of the Jedi had was a bunch of Muppets, you know. So in my mind, it was like Jar Jar for my generation. They were looking at Jar Jar the same way as the previous generation was viewing Ewoks that didn't necessarily grow up with those movies. So, you know, it's a very interesting point. And I'll say, you know, when I first saw the movie, I wasn't the biggest fan of Jar Jar. It was the same thing. It's like, what's all the bumbling antics? Squeeze me? It's like, it almost sounded like a pop culture reference at the time. But, you know, 20 years removed, you know, I'm a bit older and, you know, I can reassess. And like hearing Bryan's analysis of Jar Jar being the key to how the Empire was ultimately defeated, you know, with Qui-Gon, you know, just showing a bit of niceness. Like, you know, we can't just leave this being here, you know, just to be trampled by the droid army that's moving in. And, you know, and that one act, you know, having Jar Jar, you know, take him down to Otoh Gunga, and you know, and he takes on his life debt and brings him to meet Queen Amidala. That sparkers the peace between the Gungans and the Nabooians. Like I don't know if that's the correct term. The people of Naboo, and so they work together to push back the Trade Federation in the invasion. And then it was that one element at the beginning that was really the catalyst for the climax at the end. If you didn't have that peace agreement, it's like who else would they be able to get for reinforcement? So, you know, very interesting theory.
It's a good question, exactly, as well. So Steve, you've heard the other three. What do you think?
You know, it's really interesting. It is the theory in itself. So I'll say what Jason's. I'm actually a couple of years ahead of him, but have always, you know, for me, Star Wars was always interesting. I never really understood what my connection was, other than that I was connected to it. And it was actually only until recently I had a very interesting conversation during another podcast that we were kind of talking about some of the things that I had gone through in life. And, you know, I'm kind of for the lack of a better word, a kid who was adopted by another family and kind of looked up to, you know, I had to find my older brother, the Han Solo, like JC mentioned. And it's funny. JC says, you know, we're not Han, we're Luke. And it wasn't but 6 weeks ago or more that it was like, oh, wow, that seems to be what my connection is. He's right. I am a Luke. I was never Han Solo. We tried to be Han Solo, right? And he's exactly right. You either were the ones that got teased or you were the ones that weren't, not really weren't. You spent your time trying to be part of that other group, knowing that you would really never fit in. But you did your best just to make sure you didn't get teased. It's so true, right? It's absolutely true. I never disliked Jar Jar. I never loved him, admittingly. I thought he was necessary. There was a lot of, you know, we've got a lot of that slapstick comedy from the original trilogy. And I felt like that's what he provided in the original trilogy in the prequels when I was watching it. He was the comedy. He was that comic relief to make sure that element was still in the Star Wars story. Hearing Bryan's theory is, I mean, it's, you know, I won't say I'm a convert because I mean, I really wasn't opposite, but I would fully believe that. I mean, that makes perfect sense. You know, I love the tie-in to the Luke and Yoda interchange in comparison to, it's like, you know, that's exactly right. You know, can you show me that you have the patience to deal with not only the strong or the powerful, but can you show compassion? Can you show a friendship to those that might not have the same understanding, might not have the same physical prowess that you have? I think that's a fantastic tie-in. So yeah, no, I really appreciate the sharing. Like I said, I never really hated the character. I mean, there's certainly a sequel set of characters that I dislike way more. But you know, as far as it goes from a Jar Jar, you know, I was just kind of always middle of the road. So I think this is a very interesting, but I'm going to go ahead and say it. So we started off with, now your theory is interesting, but I had mentioned, okay, y'all don't buy into the potential Jar Jar being a Sith Lord theory. So I'm going to ask you, why do you vehemently oppose that theory?
Can I jump in 1 second just to echo and expand on something you mentioned? Is the physical comedy of Jar Jar, is that almost shot for shot, you may not like the physical comedy of Jar Jar. You may say, like, this doesn't belong in, you may say I don't like it, but you can't say it doesn't belong in Star Wars because, and you can't say it's stupid, because almost shot for shot, Jar Jar's physical comedy is taken from Harold Lloyd, Buster Keaton, and Charlie Chaplin films.
Yeah.
So if you say that Jar Jar's physical comedy is stupid, you're criticizing the root of all physical comedy, of all filmmaking right there. And I haven't done it. I've thought about going and doing side-by-sides on YouTube. Mm-hmm. But it is, when he's hanging from the Trade Federation tank, that's Harold Lloyd hanging from the clock.
No, it's he's doing it on a streetcar. So an electric streetcar pole. So it's actually moving on the street as well. It's amazing. And there's another one, Buster Keaton did a movie where he's trapped in a ship by himself and he's fending off these pirates. And the gag with Jar Jar getting his foot stuck in the battle droid and shooting everybody is something that Buster Keaton does with a cannon on the deck of this ship, like shot for shot.
Also, the boomas rolling down the hill after Jar Jar is a Buster Keaton thing.
Yeah. No, it's amazing to me how much silent film history gets put into Jar Jar. And I would love, more than anything, if anybody from Lucasfilm is watching this, someone put together an animated Jar Jar show that's just silent shorts, like Chaplin shorts or whatever, because I would
be awesome.
I would murder to see that stuff. Younglings. I would murder younglings to see it.
That's already been done, sir.
Going back to the creation of I'm going to get in. I'll be quick. I mean, going to the creation of Jar Jar Binks. Number one, George Lucas has recently said that Jar Jar Binks is his favorite character. This is, he has said this. It's not a lie. And he has this, but one of the things they said about creation of the character, he did want a character which he was basing partially, not completely, on the Goofy character from the Disney cartoons. Because again, obviously, he's very abrasive with the original cartoons. It always has been, right back to 77 and probably before. So there is a heritage of a connection with that. I think also, which is like, we're all a little older when we originally watched the movies probably a while ago when we were younger. Obviously, the first three movies, and you're talking about comedy, this is a good point. George Lucas has always had comedy in nearly every single movie he has ever made, from Howard the Duck to Raiders of the Lost Ark, the original Star Wars movie. There are always funny bits and jokes. And I think the only thing I can put my finger down about the original prequels in general, I think probably as us being younger children becoming adults, we probably expected a more adult movie when it came out. Now, if it was a more adult movie, what would we have actually said? Because it probably would have been, oh my God, why is this so serious and boring and dull? How dare he take out all the funny elements? And then
we would have said the same thing we said about the sequels then.
We would have said, it in reverse to what the Phantom Menace is what we don't like. We would say the other way around, probably.
I said this, and I'm going to diverge but come back. We got The Mandalorian, which I think is pretty much universally loved, and then now we have Bad Batch. And the comparison I made is that The Mandalorian is the show that is like a spiritual sequel to The Empire Strikes Back. It's a little more serious. It's a little bit more, gritty and things. I said, and people railed on me, I liked Bad Batch better than The Mandalorian because to me, that's more A New Hope. That's more swashbuckling and hopeful and things like that. So I think we actually did kind of get our more serious Star Wars. We just got it in The Mandalorian instead of in episodes 1, 2, 3, or 7, 8, 9.
I think there's more to come based on the current the current theories, right? I think there's a lot more to come of the darker side or the more serious side of Star Wars.
Oh yeah, I mean, like Andor, which is like the prequel to Rogue One. I would be very surprised if it was sort of funny at all.
Right.
Rogue One isn't massively funny, although it has some elements, but not as maybe as some of the others. But again, we'll find out, perhaps.
It's really brilliant political commentary from George Lucas too, like how people can take the best intentions and from politicians and say, sure, you're going to create an evil galactic empire, but it seems like it's going to keep me safe. I'm on board, right? And that's just what Palpatine is doing in smaller doses with people like Anakin and people like Jar Jar, sort of one at a time, and turning all of them against them to say, like, look, the Jedi tried to kill me. We had to get rid of them. Like, there was no way about it. Like, creating these enemies that don't exist, that have an actual different reality than the perception that the popular media might give us of them. It's easy for us as an audience to say, like, Palpatine was totally wrong, but try to step into Jar Jar's perspective in Attack of the Clones, right? Palpatine is from Naboo. Palpatine was someone Padme trusted. He trusted Padme more than anything. This is how we take the words of our politicians sometimes. Like, when we decide we want to trust them, they can use us in completely nefarious ways. And Jar Jar was more of a victim than a perpetrator, I think, across the board.
I think you to echo that also, Palpatine, I mean, Padme, arguably one of the most politically savvy people across all the Star Wars movies, was manipulated. She's the one who did the vote of no confidence in Valorum. Completely manipulated, and it took her through halfway through Attack of the Clones to even get an inkling that, oh wait, maybe Palpatine's not who he thinks he is. At the beginning of Attack of the Clones, she's in his office being like, hey, help me figure out who's trying to kill me. Oh, you're going to give me Anakin and Obi-Wan? This is amazing. She's 100% on board, flag raving
and he's setting her up. Just like going, there you go.
Yeah.
This is the one you need, and she's great. And look, it's going to happen.
Yeah, it's not until you're doomed. He takes over, with emergency powers, where she's kind of like, oh, ooh, what did I do, and what role did I play in this? So yeah, I mean, he's just the ultimate political bad guy, and I think, I think a lot of us, when we watched those prequel movies, were expecting High Republic, right? And what we got is kind of a political movie, and everybody's like, I don't want to hear about trade taxation routes and Jar Jar stepping in poop. But it's like, that's our history as a human beings, is like, our history is there's a political system, it goes into upheaval, and then there's the fight back against it, and it's over and over and over again. So like, the prequels aren't boring, the prequels aren't bad movies. Our expectations for what we thought they were going to be were misaligned, and if you want to blame George for anything, it's maybe that he didn't prepare us for the fact that these are political movies. These aren't slash and hack lightsaber action movies,
Right. Well, I mean, he did kind of prepare us with the opening crawl, opening up with the taxation of trade routes as, to outlying star systems is in dispute. So he kind of gave us a little bit of a warning, but no, I think that's
C-SPAN. Here you go.
Yeah.
You could put some sub clauses in. Yeah, Series A-4 mark thing. See your lawyer's notes or something like that. That might have helped.
Go ahead, Jason.
I was just going to say, it's interesting, George's first movie, THX 1138, was hated when it came out. And I think if that movie had come out in 1984, or even the early 2000s, it would have been heralded for how brilliant and stark it was. And like, during the .com, like, what does this mean? And robots are taking over and all of this stuff. He was 40 years too early for that. And I think the prequels were probably 15 to 20 years too early.
It's been interesting that since the 2016 election, people have been looking at the prequels a lot differently and going, oh, maybe we have been, repeating cycles in history, and that George Lucas was actually onto something.
And I think, going back to JC's point about, what did you expect, or that George did try to set it up. You think that it's like the movies that we love, if let's say the original trilogy, those are the ones we love. That's what we kind of set our expectations of. Well, we're in the middle of a civil war between the Empire and the Rebellion. How did we get there? The prequels can't be anything other than political to some point to show how you got to that rebellion. So I think a lot of us missed that.
I was always very surprised when people said, like, I don't like Phantom Menace. It's too bright and shiny. Like, Star Wars isn't supposed to be bright and shiny. But I would argue that the bright, shining images of Coruscant, of the galaxy in Phantom Menace, as a stark contrast in juxtaposition to the horrible utilitarian grayness of the galaxy in the original trilogy, just shows how far Palpatine flushed things down the toilet for his own power.
Right.
I'll also echo that in real life world. The decadence of 80s hair bands versus Nirvana, Alice in Chains, Pearl Jam, right? So you see that. You go in waves where it's decadent and over the top and larger than life, and then it gets real quiet and understated, and that's just how we are. We take 10 years and we get really into and self-absorbed, and then it pulls way back. And that's what you're seeing in the prequels versus the original trilogy. And just from a personal experience, I made a movie. I lived in East Berlin for a month in 2012, and where I lived in East Berlin was very much like what you see in the original trilogy. As a metaphor, you go over to West Berlin, and it's very prequel still. It's shiny, scrubbed monuments and stuff, and it's not like that. And so even today, or I guess 8 years ago, you still had that straight line between what it was and what it is under a oppressive regime. Like, it's there. It's in our world. Maybe you don't like watching it reflected in your Star Wars movie, but like, it's there. That's what it is.
Sometimes I think George Lucas is smarter than all of us. And one of the things he was doing very specifically, I think, in the classic trilogy, they were very contemporary. Like, they were a contemporary take on serials, right? So all of the design was based on how do we make it feel like a gritty 70s movie, or a gritty 70s movie, but with the sci-fi elements. And then when he goes back and walks it back 30 or 40 years with the prequels, he goes back exactly that amount of time into the 30s of cinema history, right? That Art Deco look to everything, and even the acting style, right? The acting style, if you look at movies from the 30s and 40s, they have the same acting style as the prequels. The 70s had a very contemporary acting style, and to the credit of J.J. Abrams and Rian Johnson, the acting style of the sequel trilogy made that leap into the future about the same distance that they did from the original trilogy. And it's from the looks too. You look at the Art Deco past of the prequels and look at our Art Deco past, and then look at the brutalism of the 70s and 80s through the Cold War. And that's really where you get that design element across the board through our history in that real time. And George Lucas was doing that. So I don't know if he was doing it instinctively, but he certainly leaned into it.
Well, I guess he obviously had a fair amount of time to think over the prequels as well, which is a good thing. And he, obviously he matured for good or bad reasons. Some people might disagree, but obviously he got older, and obviously his job skills obviously changed as well through his own life. Well, I think we'll give Jason a bit of time to talk as well. But the other thing I should point out, or I'd like to talk about, is obviously, like you said, our first impressions of the Phantom Menace. And I think you probably all did this. When the original trailer came out, do you all remember seeing that? Probably going to the cinema. And I love that, you know, and like, you know, because we all saw the trailer, we didn't really know what the film was going to be about, even though we'd seen all the bits, because it was a teaser and you see them coming through. And I think the first scene was the Gungans, wasn't it? Coming through the mist. Yeah. And you're thinking, yeah, this is going to be amazing. And they're crawling through, and it's like, is it like Yoda's place? Is it Dagobah? And then we're seeing everything, and then there's the pod racing, and you're like, wow. And I can't remember if Darth Maul, you see his double-ended lightsaber, or he just has it one. I think he might just has one.
He says one.
He leaves it for a surprise to later. But then we have to wait 6 months. And still, George Lucas is like, I'm telling you nothing. Yeah. You'll find out nothing. Toys aren't coming out. You'll have to figure it out for yourself. And we've got all these expectations of like, what's he going to be? What's he going to do? And I think, not in a bad way, because I actually really quite enjoyed The Phantom Menace at the cinema. You know, I wasn't really, at time, I came out thinking this is bad. Any of it, I enjoyed it completely. Yeah. And like I think said, and luckily for us, you know, I mean, I'm 45. I don't know how old everybody else is. We didn't have the internet, so the only people you could talk to were your friends. You know, you didn't have to worry about Joe, who's 300 miles around the corner, who's going, oh my God, you won't believe what they've done to this terrible film, you know, and like, which is the problem, unfortunately, that has hit the sequels. And there's nothing we can do about it because we live in the world of technology. But at the time, the only people you would really discuss it with would be your friends, and you might see something in the paper if you read the paper. But let's go to Jason, because he's been very quiet, and give us some of your views about anything like the trailer, Phantom Menace, or the Clone Wars, or Revenge of the Sith, because we haven't actually mentioned them either.
Okay, well, yeah, so I will tell you, the trailer, when it first debuted, I want to say it was Good Morning America. Now, this was back in the early days of the internet. I may have had a 56K modem. So the debut was Good Morning America. Yes, the Gungans coming out of the mist. I definitely recall that being the very first scene, and you know, the tears just start coming down. You know, you're 16 years since Return of the Jedi, so the hype expectation was sky high. And then after the trailer debuted, you know, I wanted to rewatch it over and over again. So if anyone remembers QuickTime and how long it took to download, what was it, like maybe a 2 megabit?
Came in lines, didn't it? I think sometimes.
Yeah. So it took hours just to download one single like tiny file that can take you a millisecond today. So, you know, fast forward, you know, 6 months later, you know, before you could really purchase the tickets online, you know, you had to go to the theater and you had to stand in line. We had this theater here in Dallas, UA Galaxy 8. It had THX certified sound, 80-foot tall screens. It was advertised as the largest screens in Texas. So, you know, this was before, you know, movies were really being shown in IMAX. So this was the theater that we went to go camp out for the tickets. And it was a lot of fun. You know, you had people there cosplay. There were lightsaber battles out in the parking lot. We had local news there. I was wearing this silly Tripping Daisy fuzzy hat. The guy's like, hey, I got to interview you. It's like, all right, whatever. So, you know, you get the tickets and you go see the movie for the first time. You're there with a group of friends. And oh my God, it was like, what was that? Oh, the pod racing, Darth Maul, and I don't know about that Jar Jar character, but you know, I loved it. So, you know, you go back, you rewatch it several times, and you know, the prequels get a lot of flack saying that, oh, it's too like Bryan said, it's too bright and shiny. But you know, things you gotta understand that this is basically the peak of the Republic before, you know, the dark times, before the Empire. So everything has not been, you know, completely destroyed and blown to bits. And, you know, watching the character arc, you know, people call this the Skywalker saga, or Lucasfilm calls it the Skywalker saga. I like to think of it more of Palpatine's story, how he rose to power, how he was able to just manipulate Amidala, you know, Anakin, Jar Jar, and just to see Ian McDiarmid go from episode 1 through episode 3 and just see his change. You know, there's one scene in particular in Revenge of the Sith that it gets me every time. It's the scene between Anakin. She's back at her apartment, and Padme's at the apartment. Anakin is at the Jedi Temple just contemplating. He knows that Mace Windu and the other Jedis are coming to confront Palpatine, and you just see this emotion in their eyes. There's no dialogue. It's just silent. And you see, the skyline of Coruscant, and the sun's setting, and then you see the single tear come down Anakin's face, and he decides, all right, I got to do something. I mean, that to me is probably one of the best shot scenes in all of the movies, because there's no dialogue. It's just pure emotion. And think about it.
It's quite right, and it's a beautiful shot. I mean, I haven't read the Star Wars books. Please don't get at me this. But I would quite fancy to see maybe a TV series rather than movie, the early days of Palpatine, like almost like, I suppose, the House of Cards, because obviously he didn't get to be the senator just by stepping in. He must have done other things that were fairly dubious between this period of before becoming, like the attaché to Naboo. So I think that would be a fascinating thing to see, but quite interesting. Anyway, let's get on to what Steve does, and then we'll get back to Bryan and JC. So what give us some of your opinions about maybe like the start of the movie, just like Jason said, or anything else about some of the scenes that you enjoyed from the prequels and Jar Jar as well, or not enjoyed.
No, if you no, like I said, I've always just kind of ridden the middle line on the prequels. They certainly weren't my favorite. I was definitely an original trilogy guy, like many of us were, but I didn't dislike them. I think, for me, Revenge of the Sith, I know a lot of people say Revenge of the Sith is the best movie of the prequels. I'm like, for me, it's like, what did we, well, I think I said this to Jason yesterday, what did we really get in Revenge of the Sith other than Darth Vader, right? At that point, most of the story had been told. So for me, episode one, I think JC said earlier, I mean, episode one really was, or maybe it was even Robin, forgive me, but it was like, this is the meat and potatoes. This is the baseline of everything that's going to get us to episode 4. Little did we know we needed the Rogue One thrown in there later to show us the transition of the Death Star plans. But no, I think, super excited. Jason talks about standing in line, and, if episode 1 was so bad, why did we stand in line to get the tickets for episode 2? And if episode 2 was so bad, why did we stand in lines to get tickets to episode 3? If they were so bad, why did we go back and stand in line again when they came back out in 3D?
Oh, I think I watched Phantom Menace probably about 4 or 5 times.
I saw Phantom Menace 27 times in the movie theater.
That's a lot.
I worked at a movie theater, and I was a manager, and so I had to be there until all the movies were over anyway. And I'd specifically set up my schedule so that I could finish counting the money and get my employees out of there and watch Phantom Menace after on the clock. So I ended up seeing Phantom Menace 77 times theatrically. But
that's a lot.
But that was I feel like I'm a special circumstance there. But I mean, who else but a Star Wars nerd would rearrange their schedule to be able to watch Phantom Menace on the clock?
So you were talking, you guys were talking about the trailer. So the trailer was released, I believe it was on a Tuesday, November 12th, 1998. And
it's about 21 years ago, isn't it? Yeah.
It played before and after both The Waterboy and Meet Joe Black. So we went to, my friends and I, right after school, drove to a 30-screen movie theater, and we had looked at the running time of both Waterboy and Meet Joe Black and looked at when their times were and built a grid so that we knew every single time that the episode 1 trailer would play. And so we saw the trailer 9 times the day it was released in the theater, because we would movie theater hop right up until the point someone probably like Bryan grabbed us by the back of our shirts and escorted us to our car.
Now, if it would have been in my theater, I would have been in there with you.
Or perhaps they were just thinking, how come this guy really likes The Waterboy?
Yeah, no, I had to drive.
Or Meet Joe Black.
I had to drive 40 miles from my hometown to get to a theater that was playing the trailer. So I only got to see it like 3 times that day. But it was such an exciting and thrilling moment. And one thing I'd like to say about the prequels that I don't think people give them enough credit for, but the distribution and the exhibition that we have of movies today is 100% because of the prequels. The reason we have great sound systems is because when Phantom Menace came out, George Lucas was giving priority to theaters that upgraded to THX sound and 5.1 sound because they did that with Return of the Jedi and Dolby. And then when Attack of the Clones came out and they'd shot it digitally, it was, we'll give better terms to those theaters that are projecting digitally. And by the time Revenge of the Sith happened, it happened even more because he was pushing that and forcing theaters to say, like, listen, if you want to make money on this, you've got to invest in your technology. And now it seems unthinkable that you can walk into a theater and not get that really pristine digital experience. I don't know if you all probably remember when you go into a movie, part of the reason and excitement of going opening weekend was so you went to make sure that you didn't get a print that was all messed up and scratched and dirty with chunks missing of it and dialogue missing here or there. And I mean, I can tell you, as a projectionist who was working on 35 with Phantom Menace, like after 6 months of that print playing, it was beat to hell. And when we had to send it back, I mean, when I had to send mine back after the re-release in January, so this was in 2000, and they said, oh, we're going to take all these prints and we're going to chop them up and put the film strips in the VHS. I mean, I will cop to going like, well, if they're going to do that anyway, and I ended up chopping out, I've got a reel of film about this big that's all the lightsaber duels. So I kept those.
I have a rather unusual story, actually, about Return of the Jedi. So I was probably about 10, I think. And our local cinema, someone stole the film and ransomed it to the cinema. This actually really happened.
Was it Dan Fogler and Kyle Newman from Fanboys that did it?
And because they only had one print of the film, and that was all they had. We can't have another one. And because they knew how many people were going to see the film, and they were like, well, we're going to hang on to it. And I think they paid them like £1,000, which is probably like $1,500 in 1983, which is quite a lot. I don't know what happened if they got caught or not, but it was actually a real thing that happened, and it was so. Wow. People were so desperate to watch the film. I remember as well, slightly digressing, the queue was so long for Return of the Jedi, it led to the other cinema around the corner. And they were trying to get people to watch the Smurfs or Spider-Man Takes on the Ninjas instead, if they couldn't get into Return of the Jedi, which I don't think many people went for that, but there you go. We've got about 5 minutes left.
I've got
not
two
very long.
quick things to say, and then I'll shut up. Can I spit them out real quick?
Better do, right?
My first thing is, if you guys are on the internet, how many prequel memes make you laugh every day versus how many original trilogy memes make you laugh?
Oh, that's a good point.
I don't see any memes from the original trilogy at all, but every day I see a hilarious prequel trilogy meme. So there's something that says something about the staying power and the pop culture relevance of those movies. And then just the last thing I want to say is, because Bryan brought up the technology that was pushed with the prequels. I like to think that like George Lucas poured the foundation, put up the walls, and built the house that Peter Jackson and every other filmmaker out there is now decorating. So yeah, okay, Gollum is a gorgeous thing, but he's hung on the wall that George Lucas put the time and money in to build. And without those walls, Gollum's got no place to go. None of this is here without him investing in that and having the vision to invest in that.
You were quite right. I'm going to point out as well, obviously the actor who played it was Raheem Best, incredibly good actor, and a dancer before he started. Like you said, and JC is quite right. I mean, it was the first fully digital animated character, apart from his waist down, but the whole head part, which is the most important bit, it's the first one they ever really did. And you're quite right. Jurassic Park, Terminator, which obviously came out later and people applauded, didn't so much with the Phantom Menace, but without that wouldn't have happened. I've seen, and I think you've all seen, have you ever seen the stop motion versions of Jurassic Park on the deleted scenes?
Yes.
Maybe I haven't, or maybe I have. And like, that's probably what might have happened if this hadn't happened. And Jurassic Park wouldn't have been very good. It would have been just
that was the whole reason they went back and animated, because they're like, this is not working. We are going to have to spend the money.
I don't want to be this guy, but Jurassic Park actually was what
before
George
it wasn't. Yeah, I'm making it up. I'm getting it all wrong now.
Jar Jar,
I'm saying something else. Yeah, but my point still stands. But a different movie. But nevertheless, it was the first sort of animated thing that they had from that. And yeah, ILM worked on it to get it better. But I mean, a lot of the actor underneath it did actually a fantastic job for what he was asked to do. So it should be something like I think we should really praise that, because I know he has a fairly rough time in the last 20 years now and again, and he shouldn't really have had that, because he really is a very good, keen actor.
Name one other studio or one other movie that we still say today holds up. I mean, it's Star Wars. You always hear it's like you can still watch the original trilogy today and it doesn't fall apart. But how many of our childhood movies from the 80s or whatever are just absolutely terrible? I say terrible. I mean, don't hold the test of time. Forgive me. So sorry, Bryan, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, when people give Andy Serkis all of that credit for pioneering stop motion or character animation, and that really Ahmed Best deserves a lot of that. He was there on the ground floor when they were building it in the first place. So
agreed.
No, I absolutely agree with that. I mean, that was Ahmed. That was his performance. That was his him on the actual sets. So I mean, they had to go in and animate over that, but embodied that character and sold it as a living, breathing thing. And it was one of the first fully animated characters that people were just interacting with. And I think that's amazing. Here this many years later,
it was probably very. Because again, the technology wasn't really perfect because they hadn't tried it before. So they're also giving him a lot of tasks that they're going, well, we don't know how it actually is going to work out because we haven't tried it. I mean, now they'd probably just put him in a suit with little squares all over it and nothing else. And it'd be like, carry on, and there's lots of footage in The Hobbit. You can see where Benedict Cumberbatch is a dragon with a little thing on his head, and that's all he's need to do. But obviously with Ahmed's stuff, he's got a big head thing on, which is partially green. He's got the visor on, so they don't look at his eyes, and very, very over. And that seems to be about the time we've got left. We do seem to have run out. I'm just going to very quickly, because I think we've probably only got a minute. Has anyone's mind been swayed that Jar Jar Binks is a considerably better character than they believed before?
I'll go ahead and say, yeah, you won. Yeah,
he won. Okay.
I think Bryan and JC. Again, I wasn't on the left side, but being someone that was just sitting kind of in the middle, I definitely liked the presentation today.
Very good. And Jason, very quickly, I'm afraid.
Yes. No, definitely compelling arguments. And I really want to go back and rewatch the prequels with fresh eyes, just kind of look at it through, Bryan's analysis of Jar Jar. So
agreed.
Very good. I totally agree. I think there is definitely merits I probably hadn't thought about before. And I'm afraid that's all we've got time for. Please donate to First Robotics. It is the thing that we are doing for 50 years of Lucasfilm. Just click on the link. It would really make a difference to everybody who's worked on this show. We work very, very hard to try and do this and bring out these fantastic people like Bryan and JC to come along as well. And I hope you've enjoyed our chat about Jar Jar Binks, and maybe you should watch it again. Take on what they said, and you might find some extra little gems that you just haven't thought about before.